You cannot have AI walk you through a 12-month process and dialogue with the regulator to ensure that you get regulated.
In the 253rd Block Talks, we speak with Cairon Clarke, co-founder of Zynta, to learn about the payments landscape in Africa. I'm your host, Mauricio Magaldi, and this is BlockDrops, your weekly digest on blockchain for business. These news are not a form of endorsement, sponsorship, or encouragement for consumption and are meant for educational purposes only. All right, everybody. I'm here finally, after many attempts, with Cairon Clarke, who's going to tell us who he is and what he does with blockchain. Kai, welcome to BlockTalks.
Thank you so much, Mauricio. Great to chat with you finally. I'm super excited about this episode. My name is Kai. I run Zynta. Zynta is last mile regulated stablecoin infrastructure with a key focus on Africa. And so essentially what we do is we enable any business, neobank, payment service provider to integrate our APIs to make payments globally to Africa, intra-Africa, and Africa outwards. We're essentially bridge, but for Africa. So that is our core product offering. We're predominantly on Solana. We've been backed by Solana Labs. We're part of Incubator Cohort 3. And we are really trying to improve payment infrastructure for Africans locally, businesses, enabling people to pay into Africa as well.
Now, I was checking on your LinkedIn. I was doing a little bit of stalking, and you have a wide range of industry experiences that are very different among themselves. So I saw some telco, I saw finance, I saw healthcare, I saw sports. So what in that experience actually provoked the ambition to solve this, which is a substantial challenge in the region? What led you to it? How that experience brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's really interesting that you said that, some people do ask and some people just don't ask. I spent a long time as a management consultant, but always on the technical side. And to be honest with you, I used to get itchy fingers, after about a year, working on a project. So I worked for a number of large banks around the UK, from HSBC to Barclays and a few others, and in investment and wealth management as well. Even in South Africa, right? I worked with FNB in South Africa, with Old Mutual, St. James's Place, European Financial Group. And then I did a couple of stints in around telecoms, where I worked for both Virgin Media and Vodafone. One of the projects was really, really cool because we was literally building, a whole new town for fiber networks. So we had to work with, the surveyors, with the council to actually get the waivers to actually approve the project. We had to go and source the materials from, China and a few other places. So that was a really, really interesting project. Spent some time in healthcare as well, while I was program managing one of the largest rollouts for new data centers. And, across that experience, what it really taught me was how to navigate the world of work in a bunch of different scenarios with a bunch of different people and a bunch of different cultures. And I think I was really able to relate that back to, A, me being Nigerian, partially I'm half Nigerian, half Jamaican, but B, separately actually solving a real issue and a real problem that I experienced firsthand when I was, in Nigeria myself, trying to move money from Nigeria to the UK, right? There were huge problems with, moving, $50,000 from Nigeria to the UK, egregious fees, long delays. And I really thought payment infrastructure was something I should do. Pretty much fell in love with, technology as a kid. When I was 7, I think my mum bought me one of those build your own robots, and I just kind of built that myself, and I've pretty much been interested in that since. And I think I just applied some of that to, technology transformation rollouts across all of the industries I've worked in.
In that experience, and one of the things I like about stories like yours is that you get so annoyed about the problem that you just can't help yourself and just, I'm going to fix this, the hell with it, right? And the use case is the first driver. It's not necessarily the tech. It's this is a problem. I'm going to find technology that fixes this. And then you go build the thing. And I love that. Now, it's very common, and I've had this conversation multiple times, of people outside of Africa that goes Africa. It's a monolith. It's a one thing. And we know, I'm from Brazil. They all say Latin America, and that's, let's take that with a grain of salt. Now, I would love to hear what are the nuances between the different countries, the different jurisdictions, the culture as you roll out Zynta across the region, and maybe the flavor of the use cases, but they may be similar in nature, but there are nuances as well. So how do you give us 2-3 examples of how they differ and how you've approached solving for them differently with the company?
Yeah, 100%. And actually, I completely agree with you, right? I think people just kind of think of Africa, especially when you're in somewhere like America, which obviously has a number of different states, but the states are pretty much, almost like countries in their own right, right? And, Africa is a multitude of different languages, cultures, currencies, regulators, everything. But I would kind of separate into from a financial technology perspective, kind of 4 different key areas. So, West Africa, around Nigeria, Ghana, typically you have the fintechs, right, that have been, in or around for a while. They're building where the banks just refuse to build, and in terms of local payment infrastructure, Nigeria actually has some of the best payment infrastructure in the world that people don't know, right? They just assume it's bad. That's not the problem. The problem is the international payment infrastructure. So if I send, and I think it's the same in Brazil with Pix, right? So if I send money from one Nigerian account to another Nigerian account, it lands pretty much immediately, gets settled pretty much immediately. In the US, if you send from a US dollar account to another US dollar account, it can take a couple of days to clear and land, right? And that's just in the US. Then you look at, kind of East Africa, and, M-Pesa is pretty much dominated there in terms of the structure and the way things work. Looking at South Africa is a lot more, or southern parts of Africa, generally have a lot more advanced payment infrastructure. So South Africa is quite mature in terms of not just the payment infrastructure, but also the products, that kind of sit around that, from ISAs to JISAs to, wealth products. I worked on a couple of wealth products out there in South Africa, and then you also have, around parts of North Africa, P2P kind of payment services, some of the francophones, mobile money is quite popular there as well. So it's really important to understand all of the nuances around Africa, right? As a whole concept. And one thing I found is, and predominantly right now where we've been doubling down in is predominantly West Africa. So we're going aggressively for licenses there, but with some partnerships with a couple of banks, we're also opening up corridors in Kenya, where we applied to the Zambia sandbox, where we're one of the first companies to be licensed under the new Nigerian Virtual Asset Service Provider framework. We are about to get our license in Senegal that will be opening up with Tether and Solana, right? So we're doing a joint event with them to open up that corridor. Liberia will be one of the first people with a payments license there as well. So essentially what we're doing is we're doubling down on the networks in the regions which we have very strong connections, first and foremost, which is from a banking perspective. So we're trying to avoid some of the mobile money stuff now. And we actually want to build a lot of our own infrastructure. Mobile money is good because you can access a lot of liquidity and you can aggregate, from those operators. But in terms of the larger size volumes, which we're really trying to double down on, right? Which is the enterprises, government agencies, actually enabling the large size volumes. Generally, you need to either have liquidity or actually build your own payment infrastructure. And I think payment infrastructure is a very interesting concept to think about. When I wasn't in payments, you just kind of, that you press a button, that you send some money and then something happens and the money arrives, right? But actually looking at everything that happens behind closed doors, in a number of different cases, there's a lot of manual processes that kind of go in the background, from clearing to settling. And I think stablecoins have really improved some of those efficiencies to make, cross-border trade easier, from a US dollar liquidity standpoint, adding that additional, value proposition there as well. And, it just improving friction across the board has generally been great. And we essentially utilize, that technology to improve our operations and speed up.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And I think even though the domestic payments is something that most countries had to resolve themselves because it's within their own boundaries, like you gave a few examples in Brazil, Nigeria, India has UPI. The US is moving slowly, but into FedNow. There's faster payments in Europe and all that. I think that because cross-border is such a relevant, unaddressed problem, there's a huge field of opportunities. But I am also concerned, and this is more on a geopolitical sovereignty type angle, with dollar-denominated stables being just 99.56 or something % of the entire stablecoin supply, which in in use cases like I want to protect my local purchasing power because my currency is devaluing and I'm going to buy dollars or stable coins to protect that, makes perfect sense. But when you're running a business and you're doing multi-currency everything, accepting payments and running payments, the more complexity you add, the more cost to run the business it becomes, because now you have to have a treasury and you may need to hedge stuff and you may need to figure out, how long can the tenor of that be? Or do I do cross-currency swap all the time? So that adds a lot of complexity. And there's other geopolitical aspects I don't need to drill into, but you're handling that arrival of a dollar rail into these countries. What has been your experience in that regard? Is it easier because it's the dollar? Is it harder because it's the dollar? What sorts of trade-offs where you arrived at a new country were you demanded or requested by the use case to tackle, and how did that play out?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I wrestle myself with a lot of the time, right? I think on one aspect, definitely the dollarization of a lot of emerging markets and kind of currencies is an issue. Everybody wants the dollar, right? I think everybody wants access to the dollar. These stable coins has pretty much enabled the US to spread the dollar as far and as wide as possible. Essentially, what we do with our product offering is we build a lot of the last mile infrastructure. So those are stable coins into locals, and locals back into stable coins. So we build those with our own ramp infrastructure, some banking infrastructure that we have, partner liquidity providers that we settle in and out of, and other ways of liquidity as well. What I found, specifically speaking to a lot of governments and central banks around Africa, something that we've done is we pulled together the AVAF, which is the African Virtual Assets Forum. And essentially what it is it drives, stablecoin adoption and regulatory clarity across the continent of Africa. And, we're running a number of different roadshows. I was speaking to the Central Bank of Ethiopia the other day, spoken to obviously all the central banks that we're pretty much in licensing frameworks for already, because you have to go through that process. But, we have around conversations with around 15 that we've kind of been in open dialogue with. And essentially what we've realized is pretty much the same thing from all of them, right? They want to make sure that three things exist. One, essentially they're able to, kind of tax cryptocurrency effectively, so that, regardless of any trade-offs with dollarization, they're able to tax the on and off ramps, which is a very important thing for them. Two, there has been a lot of skepticism around the stable coins and blockchain assets, but it has quickly been changing since the Genius Act rather. People have kind of turned from, I'm not interested in, stable coins at all to, okay, let's have a look. Let's see how, we can kind of get involved and see the frameworks that we need to bring out. That's been the other key thing. And then three, it's trying to put in the right policies and procedures to make sure that there isn't essentially a bank run on the country. For example, different revenue services around Africa, for example, the Nigeria Revenue Service are bringing out a new specific framework, and there will be requirements for your taxes that are paid in crypto, for example, to then be swapped back into local currency to actually pay that, right? So there's always going to be a route to make sure that people have to actually pay for their day-to-day objects and items in local currency. Otherwise, there'll be absolutely no need for the local currency. And something that I've seen as well is obviously there's been, a lot of talk about on-chain FX and also more localized stablecoins. I'm not sure long-term how localized stablecoins will do. So I think there will be, obviously everyone will have a localized stablecoin. From a liquidity standpoint, I think it will make it easier for everybody to just ditch their local currency and hold dollars, unfortunately. And what will probably happen over time, not trying to get too political here, but people will then look for something outside of a dollar, whether that is, Bitcoin or whatever it is, right, over time. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts, but these are just kind of some findings that we have been seeing or understanding the more we've been speaking to, different businesses, different central banks, and it's kind of understanding where the market's moving to.
Interesting. Now, that's a great perspective. I mean, of someone who's, at the edge of these conversations and driving that type of trade-off. It's an important perspective. Absolutely.
Existem empresas que oferecem serviços e existe infraestrutura sobre a qual o mercado inteiro é construído. A Quadra é a segunda. Liquidez, roteamento, risco e reporting em uma única camada institucional, para que bancos e PSABs operem com a sofisticação dos maiores players globais, com eficiência e total conformidade. A Quadra estará na Febraban-Tech de 24 a 26 de agosto em São Paulo, no stand A1. Venha conhecer. Quadra.trade.
One of the things you mentioned, and I want to double click on that, is the regulation. So I had a little while ago, I had Ed Woodward from Zero Hash. And one of the things that he said was from the very beginning, they felt that having licenses everywhere would be a regulatory demand and it will be a strategic moat. And I've heard a glimpse of that as you elaborated on your answers. And I want to double click on your strategy. I mean, you mentioned a number of countries where you're getting the licenses on. Is this an imperative for you to grow the business? It's a very different stage where we are as an industry now, where Edward and Zero Hash were when they started. But it seems that this has been a common thread on successful businesses that are actually tackling on-chain payments the way you and Zynta are doing. So talk me through, what the thinking is in terms of the licensing. Are you usually the first to have that conversation with the countries? If they don't have a regime, how do you handle that? What's your thought process around that?
Yeah, again, another great question. And it's something that is directly tied and related into our strategy. And we hadn't really realized it at the time. But, I think when we got into the Solana incubator, we pretty much, it made us think about how we were positioning our business. So my co-founder, Kola, is actually helping write some of the, processes and regulation for the new VARA, the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority in Nigeria. Our operations lead has got, some very close connections across a number of other African countries. And essentially what we've realized is, there are the moats that were available previously, a number of them have, kind of dissipated due to the rise of AI, right? So any technology first mover advantage has pretty much disappeared. I feel like if you build something first, but you don't necessarily build it that well, somebody can literally copy your whole website, pretty much ask code to build your whole technology and just build it better than you, right? However, there's a number of things that still cannot be replicated by AI yet, right? You cannot have AI walk you through a 12-month process and dialogue with the regulator to ensure that you get regulated. It can help you with, some of the documentation that needs to be done, but that end-to-end process, that experience of actually working with regulators, I've worked with a number of regulators at a lot of the banks that I worked with and wealth managers I worked with, actually getting the procedures, policies, anti-money laundering checks, etc., all down to a T and making sure the processes are in place are also very important. And the way I see things now is crypto is maturing as an industry to, there are those entities with regulation and there are those without, right? So even, from prediction markets perspective, from charter banks, everybody now, the real moat is in regulation. And what we'll see, in my opinion, over the next couple of years is the entities that are licensed are the ones that will be able to provide services to all the ones that are unlicensed. So they will have a significant moat. And the other thing I found as well is that it has made it easier for anybody to be an entrepreneur. So the barriers to entry are significantly lower. However, the cost of licensing and the barrier for entry with licensing is significantly higher because capital requirements, cost of getting the license, the process around that, can take a lot of time and it can be quite costly. So that is, another thing that we've kind of been thinking about. The other key moat, in my opinion, that still is outstanding is relationships. Relationships, based on, family relationships, friend relationships, Web3 based relationships, your proximity to regulators, large enterprises, again, cannot be replicated. There's certain doors that can only be opened by you having a personal relationship with these people. And so actually trying to leverage some of those unfair advantages is pretty much what we've been trying to do to kind of, distance ourselves from the number of growing companies that are building within the space. And we actually were, we've evolved the company a number of times. So we actually were an on and off ramp using somebody's infrastructure initially, like just a small B2C on and off ramp, like a small widget. We then pivoted to B2B where we did our first transaction for a business, where we made more fees from that one transaction than we had for like the last 5 months of doing B2C. And then, we built out a neobank. And then, in the Solana incubator, we kind of realized, the opportunity was to build the infrastructure for all the other providers and partners to use. So as part of that infrastructure, we're looking to do a number of things, including, purchasing the bank in Nigeria. We're doing as part of this fundraise that we're close to closing up. And, just acquiring the additional licenses enables us to, move quickly, open the corridors and have everybody else use us.
And it also shows how it's the kind of coming of age for, crypto in a sense. I was in Paris twice in the last couple of months, and the ratio of hoodies to suits is gradually shifting to the point where proof of talk, I think I saw 4 people with hoodies. Everybody else, including me, was wearing like a blazer, a jacket, or a suit or something. So I think this is also or a temperature check on where we are. The sad part is I heard from many of the TradFi people who were there in these events, the vibe I got from them was like, thank you, decentralization. We'll take it from here. And as a decentralization maxi myself, I'm like, it hurts my soul because I'm a former banker. And, the reason why I built this because of the decentralization paradigm. And now, we're talking about licensing and central banks getting involved and things like that. But you touched on AI, and I do want to elaborate a little bit more on that. We're seeing, the entrepreneurship and all that, but this also gives you, who are building on chain, an opportunity to build further use cases and capture a little bit more of that revenue just by adding agent support into your offering. 2 questions. Is this something you're pursuing, and what are the primary use cases you've been exploring?
Yeah, 100%. I am a full believer in the agentification of our business, if that is even a word. But
if it's not a word, now it is a word. You heard here first.
Now we've coined it.
Yes.
Exactly. Very much interested in, improving processes as much as possible, creating workflows that agents can kind of manage for you. Something that is, I think, across the industry, a big pain point. And unfortunately, if you're running a regulated business, it's something that you can't avoid is onboarding. Everybody hates onboarding. Everybody hates providing KYC, KYB. Nobody likes to send over their passport details, especially when they're sending it over, WhatsApp or, over a platform. Nobody likes doing it. Nobody likes undertaking those processes. So we're looking for ways to try and automate our KYB process as much as possible, utilizing AI. Our sales process, we're looking at that as well. The best ways that we can reach new clients, reach new leads. Even from like a rebalancing perspective, as we start to get more liquidity as well and kind of doing some FX, we're looking at those kind of options as well. So there's a number of different use cases, but I think something that has been really, really key is of recent, we've been more working on, for some of the larger base clients, building specific workflows around payments for clients, right? And I think previously, if you're running a payments-based business, you would have a typical payment stack where businesses would either take it or leave it. It either worked for them or didn't work for them. However, what I found now is that with AI, you're able to build, more bespoke features for businesses faster, essentially enabling your, AI stack to kind of, fit into their core operations. And I think that is going to become an increasingly interesting market, building specific flows for businesses. So something that we're looking at, very, very aggressively. A couple of clients that we had recently, we're building more specific flows for them, which they're really excited about. And we're quite excited about as well, as they're like large content creation platforms, wallets and stuff. So yeah, quite excited about those opportunities specifically.
The audience doesn't know, I met you here in London where you were pitching for the Web3 demo day that is put together by Laura A. Knight, who is also a former guest here in the show. How's that side of the business? Is this like, are you always raising? What's the life of a founder these days, in the sense that most crypto funding moves with the market, and the market right now is super bearish. The whole liquidity went to Elon Musk in the last 4 weeks, so everyone is other than him is desperate. But what is that like? I mean, I can tell this for sure. I mean, your pitch was the best pitch that evening. And obviously you took the number one prize, but that doesn't come naturally, especially if you were a consultant for these many years. So how did you develop that muscle to get such, great results with pitching, and how has that evolved, and what type of difference does that make on your kind of day to day?
Yeah. I think there's kind of a number of points there. I think, I've generally been able to sell, and I think I actually enjoy what I do. So it makes it easier to sell. First and foremost, I think that's a very important thing. There were a lot of jobs that I had previously that, didn't necessarily tickle my mind, and I would just lose interest after, 6 to 9 months and kind of be like, okay, what's the next thing I'm going to do? Because I'm not particularly being pushed here. The thing about being a founder and running a startup is that, I could do 7 different roles in one day, from fundraising to sales to operations to actually processing trades myself to getting compliance to being a lawyer with Claude, right? I can do so many things in a day that I feel like it is pretty much well-rounded me. I think the market right now, I've spoken to a lot of founders, a lot of talented founders, and the market right now is probably, especially the pre-seed and seed stage market, is probably the hardest time ever to raise. In this phase, for a number of different reasons. Something that I've seen as well is kind of looking at statistics. The pre-seed and seed, correct me if my stats are slightly off, but they're not going to be that far off. Investment has dropped for those two stages by around 76%. And for Series A or Series B plus, it's increased by around 130%. So essentially what we've seen is that, ventures basically been placing bets on more established companies. And for earlier stage companies, I think it's a mix of there being a lot of capital that was probably invested that blew up, 1. 2, there being too many new founders now because of AI that are just building things and rolling out and quickly getting, some sort of small traction to try and raise capital. And it's just too diluted, so difficult for venture to actually back the runners. And C, generally in venture, you have to look for businesses that are building in new areas, right? That can return your fund. So typically you've got to, each generally, not all funds, of course, but most funds, each bet that you place has to return your fund. So finding new winners or new innovations all the time is going to be very, very difficult. It's also difficult to understand the founders that actually have a significant moat and an edge over the other founders. Fortunately for us, the Solana incubator was great. Again, I keep like praising it, but it was an absolutely fantastic experience. And they put us in front of some of, the best VCs in the world, from Founders Fund to A16Z to everybody. And we obviously were able to strengthen that muscle a lot more in terms of the pitch. We do have a lead for our round as well, and Portal Ventures, who are an absolutely fantastic lead. They have helped us with introductions to introductions to other venture capital. They're just generally helpful and kind of make me think in different ways, which I think is important. So yeah, we've been fortunate. Wrapping up, something that I didn't appreciate. This is my first time ever raising venture capital. Something that I didn't appreciate, specifically with US-based companies, is the length of time and the cost that is associated with legals. So I've literally wasted probably about, I shouldn't say wasted, but I've wasted about a month of my life, just doing probably longer, probably about 6 weeks of my life, of the last 6 weeks, just doing legals, from, all of the safe stuff, converting our LLC into a C Corp and all the rest of the documents. It's been extremely costly and extremely time consuming, but we're close to the finish line now.
Yeah, no, that is the definition of a Swiss Army knife, I guess, for the startup world. Love that. In all of that, how do you keep yourself healthy and sane? I mean, it drives us insane anyway, but do you have a recipe? Do you have a routine? I mean, I know you travel a lot, so How do you balance these things?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is going to the gym. I know it sounds so simple, picking up a sport, going to the gym, trying to be social, trying to get some sunlight. I think I find that when I don't go to the gym, my diet also fails. So then it's like a double negative, right? I'm not going to the gym so much, and then I'm eating badly, and then I just end up losing energy, putting on weight, etc. So staying in the gym and staying fit and eating clean has been an absolute life changer. Taking the right herbs as well has been great for me. Making sure that I'm seeing family. I'm getting a bit older now, so trying to spend some more time with family and close friends. I've been lucky to actually build a team around me with people that I like or love. My co-founder, I've known her since the age of 11. Two of our techies are like cousins to the family. We've got other people in different roles that have been friends for years. So we've fortunately been able to pull together, a great band of people that we all like and we generally all get along. However, we can all hold each other accountable. So although we are working super hard and it is a lot of hard work, at times it doesn't feel like work because you're also, day-to-day interacting with your friends, right? So I've found myself to be in a really fortunate relationship, and not relationship, but fortunate circumstance. I do find as well that, being a founder can obviously be a lonely journey. Fortunately for me, I haven't really experienced that as much, but I know a lot of founders say it, and it's important for me, I think, to, just find your tribe, whether that is people that are building in the same space as you, whether that is, people that, you can just kind of share experiences with, or, just, I don't know, go for a drink with when you're feeling down, but just finding your tribe of people that, you can constantly connect with to kind of keep you sane as well, because the plethora of emotions is absolutely crazy, honestly. It's one day you're top of the moon and next day you're like, is this gonna work? Have I made a mistake? And you probably I've probably gone through that up and down about 20 times. I always have the vision and always think, yeah, this is gonna work. But there's sometimes, a whole year can happen in a day, and there's other times where, you're working for like 3 months and you feel like nothing's happened, but things are still going.
The good thing you have, the community around you, because it does take a village to build something significant. And I'm glad you found yours. That's great. If you could just step back a little bit more and look to the industry more widely, more broadly, what would you say is the one thing we must fix right now to avoid working another 15 years and changing nothing? What is the one thing and why?
I think the one thing we have to fix now is it's one of two. I'm gonna say the impending water issue. That's what I'm gonna say. I was gonna say the power issue, but I'm gonna say the water issue. So I think it is common or uncommon knowledge, depending on what you've been reading or not. It is that there are impending water issues because of the amount of fresh water that AI consumes. And I think I read a stat, like every single time you generate, I don't know, a video on AI, like consumes like, a whole bathtub of water or something like that. It might have been, I'm sure it was more than that, but if everybody's doing that all the time and they're ringing the alarm bells on water availability, that is clearly a serious issue. I don't know how overstated it is or how understated it is, but I think it's something we definitely need to consider, because we are 70% water, and if there's no water, we don't survive. So there's going to be nothing that we do, right? And I think,
or we become hydraulic resources ourselves. God
exactly
knows, right?
Exactly. It's a fascinating, scary and strange time we're in. So, excited for the future.
It is a strange time we're in. I'm about 50 years old, and I'm just tired of historical years. Like, can we have like one that has nothing in it? I would love for that to be true. And then I would get bored, of course.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, and, for the listeners who stay with us so far, what would you like them to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think from this conversation, probably take away, if you ever need African rails, you can message me. No, but if I probably take away to just keep whatever you're doing, to just keep going at it, because I think good things take time. So if you have conviction in what you're doing, then just continue going at it and don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it.
Absolutely. Kai, thank you so much. This was great. Very inspiring conversation.
Thank you.
Wishing you the best of luck with Zynta. And if you happen to be in London at any point, happy to go for coffee. Thanks.
Absolutely. Would love it.
Yay!
Shout out to Kai for sharing his expertise with us today. And shout out to Pavan Kaur for making this conversation possible. Don't forget to leave a review for BlockDrops in your streaming platform of choice. And learn all about the show at blockdropspodcast.xyz. This is all for today. Stay rare, stay weird. LFG.